Watch this, every coach says dropping your wrist is wrong, but Olympic champion Chen Longcan did it even more. Here's what's actually killing your forehand. In this lesson, we're tackling the four most common wrist problems in shakehand grip table tennis: hooking, flicking outward, raising, and dropping. And here's the thing, one of these so-called problems may not actually be a problem at all, but a raised wrist is definitely wrong. The biggest issue right now for shakehand players is grip structure. Because of how we hold the racket, so many of you are hooking the wrist, flicking it outward, raising it, or dropping it. Every shakehand player deals with at least one of these. We need to correct them early, or they'll cause serious trouble down the road. The first problem is hooking the wrist. A lot of players tell me, I hook my wrist when I loop and it works fine. But if you opened up your wrist, you'd loop even better. Others say, I swing with my whole upper arm and it works great. But if you fix that, you'd be even better without the big arm swing. I once read a comment about a top player that was hilarious. It said, trust me, that player wants to fix it but can't anymore. Their forehand is limited, and they've tried to change it, but the habit is too deeply ingrained. So for those of you with a hooked wrist, let's understand why it happens. First, you need to recognize that your wrist affects your entire stroke structure. The wrist is critically important. Now, some of you hook your wrist and still get a high success rate on your loops. Fine, you can use it occasionally as a variation, but you still need to build the correct movement. When you reach a certain level, you'll discover that the wrong technique only works up to a point. It's like anything in life. When you pursue a higher standard, you have to come back to doing things the right way. Everything has to be built around correct technique. The hooking problem is mainly related to your grip. Look, when someone grips the racket this way, it's biased toward a backhand grip. That's why players who hook the wrist generally have a decent backhand. But when you transition to the forehand side, you need to adjust. The web of your hand, the tiger's mouth, should sit right on the center of the handle, like this. The reason you hook is that when you pick up the racket, you're already shifted toward a backhand-oriented grip, with the index finger positioned this way. Watch, if I grip correctly, my racket face sits like this. If I hook the wrist and notice, my forearm hasn't changed at all, only the grip has changed, and the racket face shifts completely. Look, my forearm and upper arm haven't moved at all. I simply change my grip and the racket opens up. I change it back and the racket hooks closed. So it has nothing to do with your arm. Now, why do so many players end up brushing the side of the ball with huge sweeping motions, pulling the elbow out, pushing the elbow? They can get the ball on the table, sure, but there's never any real power loop or speed. You're rubbing the side of the ball too much, just grazing it back and forth instead of driving forward with a punching, grinding contact. You can't find that feeling. All you can do is brush, and your ball speed drops. It's not that hooking is completely wrong. It's that you'll never find that explosive power loop feeling, that sensation of driving the ball straight through your opponent. That comes down to your grip. Adjust your grip at the foundation level, and the forehand hooking problem solves itself. Next, now let me talk about flicking the wrist outward. Players with this problem have a grip issue too. The index finger is creating a gap. It's lifting away from the blade. Your tiger's mouth, that soft web between thumb and index finger, should sit snugly right on the handle. Squeeze it in there. Don't death grip the racket, but don't leave it loose either. Find a moderate pressure, that's all you need. Your index finger and thumb should both stay flush against the blade with no space between them. The reason you flick outward is because you're gripping like this, see? With the index finger pulled away. That forces the wrist to angle out. When you loop with this grip, the black rubber side of the racket face becomes visible to the camera on every stroke. You're exposing the wrong side because the racket is twisting open. Both hooking and flicking outward share the same core issue. Too much side brushing, not enough direct contact. When you hook or flick outward, you're grazing the ball too much. You'll never find that explosive power loop feeling, that sense of real force transfer. And over time your stroke starts to wobble, it becomes unstable. That's exactly why correct technique matters. You might play 10 matches and your stroke holds up every time when it's built right. So remember, these two fingers must clamp the blade firmly. No gaps, no space between your fingers and the racket face. Get that locked in. Now, what causes a raised wrist? Penhold players don't have this issue, it's purely a shakehand problem. Watch, if your index finger grips like this, pushing from underneath, look at my wrist angle. It doesn't change, but the racket face tilts up. Now if I place my finger here and let my wrist hang naturally, watch, raised, then flat, raised, then flat. It's entirely connected to the order in which you wrap your fingers around the handle. So if you have a raised wrist, check your index finger position first. Because the index finger sits this way, the wrist inevitably tilts up. Now think about what each flaw does to your ball. Hooking and flicking outward, those players get too much brushing and not enough solid contact. But a raised wrist creates the opposite problem. You can't generate topspin loops. You keep getting caught by the incoming spin. The ball dumps into the net. Why? The racket head can't rotate through the ball to create its own spin. All you get is arc and rotation from the arm alone, and that means constant net balls. Now, once you've fixed your wrist position, the next thing to understand is that the forehand drive does not use wrist movement. Watch closely, my wrist is locked. It stays completely still through the entire stroke. See, no flick, no twist, nothing. At the moment of contact, the wrist does not move. The power comes from the forearm rotating, not from any wrist action. Keep your wrist firm like a bridge between your forearm and the racket face. Lock it and let the forearm do the work. The swing path should be purely up and down, not left to right, not forward and back. No wobble at all. Even the tiniest lateral shift in your wrist changes the racket angle at contact and sends the ball off course. Watch my demonstration here. Forehand drive, wrist completely locked. See how the racket stays on one clean plane? That stability is what gives you consistency. Now I'll show you the same thing with a loop, same rule applies. The wrist must not move. Whether you're driving or looping, the moment you let the wrist flex or twist during the stroke, your contact point becomes unpredictable. Power comes from the forearm's rotation, and that rotation only transfers cleanly when the wrist is a solid, fixed link in the chain. Then the wrist must be absolutely locked when you accelerate. That's the only way to keep the ball on the table. Even a tiny wobble can send your shot off its intended arc and miss the opponent's side entirely. Because the wrist is the joint closest to the racket face, any instability there has the biggest effect on where the ball goes. So remember, check your grip first, lock the wrist during every forehand stroke, and let the forearm deliver the power. Get that right, and your consistency will transform.